Now the new San Francisco Library, which is much more than a place to keep books. Spencer Michaels reports.
Use the library for knowledge, use the library for enjoyment, but above all else, use the main library.
This spring, Mayor Willie Brown inaugurated San Francisco's new library, a building designed for the future. In a city which prides itself on its cultural icons, its opera, its symphony, its newly opened modern art museum, a library might not seem like big news. But for San Franciscans, it was a long time coming. The previous library, an elegant, monumental structure, had been built after the 1906 quake. By the 1940s, it was filled beyond capacity. By the 50s, it was exposed as a disgrace, neglected and dark, and the first target of budget-cutting mayors. When Ken Dowland arrived as librarian in the 80s, the collection was in chaos.
It was quite embarrassing to be a person with 2 master's degrees and a 30-year library director, and I couldn't find a book in the old main library because of the way it was organized and laid out.
But for practical politicians, building a new library seemed out of the question. Even former librarian and historian Kevin Starr thought the voters would never approve the more than $100 million needed for a new building.
I didn't think that we could jump from one of the most neglected public library systems in the nation and automatically overnight become one of the best financed.
Finally, in 1988, library supporters got a bond issue for library construction on the ballot. It passed with 78% of the vote, proving the politicians wrong. Construction took 4 years on a site at the heart of San Francisco's Civic Center, a site the library had fought to retain when the better-supported Symphony wanted to build there. On the outside, the new 376,000-square-foot building matches the Beaux-Arts style of the Civic Center, an ornamented neoclassical architecture using California granite. Before the much more radical modern interior could be finished, more funds had to be raised. There was no bond money allocated for furnishings and computers. So library supporters went to a previously untapped source, the minority community. An additional $30 million was raised from African Americans, Latinos, Filipino, and Chinese Americans, as well as gay and lesbian groups and others. In return, the library created so-called affinity rooms in their honor.
The concept is those are places for focus and celebration and a starting point to brag about our diversity. But those, you can't add them up and have the library. The library as a whole is much greater than the sum of the parts.
The man responsible for the whole and the parts is the principal architect, James Ingo Fried. He also was the architect of the Holocaust Museum in Washington. Fried, who has Parkinson's disease, learned to speak English at a public library after emigrating to America.
Free libraries are really remarkable. I was born in Germany, and I didn't have a free library. I learned English at the free library, going there and sitting in the stacks and hiding out, trying to understand what this language was all about.
Fried was intrigued by the challenges of planning 7 stories of complicated space. How to integrate 300 computers with internet connections, 1 million books, historic displays, and rooms for video watching. He worked on details as small as designing pencil drawers and as large as the mood in the library.
Here you want this to be a happy thing. You know, this is knowledge. Knowledge is always good. Even bad knowledge is good. You want people to always experience new things. Then you want them to think about those things. You want them to use that. But thinking is never a bad process. It's always a good process. A building can make you think, it's great. A building can make you smile, it's great. A building can be part of your life, it's great. Anticipate people will come in, look up with wonderment, and say, wow.
Natural light that penetrates throughout the building, and especially down the center atrium, is the quality that draws the most oohs and ahs. Architect Cathy Simon of San Francisco was Fried's design partner.
I like to think of the library as having many readings, like a poem or a wonderful piece of music or any other work of art. And one of the important kind of metaphorical parts to me is the idea of light in the building. It has to do with actual real light or artificial light. but it also has to do with enlightenment and the idea of going from darkness to the light. This building is about how light enriches our lives and how a library brings light to the world.
Freed and Simon have placed bridges, another metaphor in a city of bridges, throughout the new library, part of the architecture of movement.
This building is a bridge from ignorance to knowledge, from the dark to the light, from the past to the future. And in many ways, the architecture reinforces that. It's full of bridges, light, and you take a trip in it.
Simon is satisfied that despite its immense size, the building does not overwhelm its users.
This is a very big building. Each floor is about 1.25 acres, which is a very big area. What's most pleasing to me about it is when I see a person in the space, that person looks dignified. It doesn't look like a small person. It looks like a big person. And in a way, this is like the Renaissance, where central planned churches really were the idea that people are at the center.
She believes that because it is people-centered, the building will not become obsolete, no matter how computer technology changes. The grace and feel of the architecture has San Franciscans and visitors traipsing through the library in record numbers. So many, in fact, that the staff is strained. Returned books aren't being put back on the shelves quickly.
These are books that were returned in the last hour, and it's like this every hour.
Long lines have formed to get new library cards and to check out books and tapes. Some library users are also complaining about the library's design. Among them, Brechin, an architectural critic and teacher.
It was meant to contain this great amount of light representing enlightenment. What it doesn't have is clarity. It's a cold and high-tech mess when you get on the inside. It's kind of big and glitzy in a Marriott hotel kind of way, but in fact it doesn't seem to have been designed for books or even for people.
Novelist and magazine writer Nicholson Baker is suing the library for allegedly throwing out books it didn't have room for.
What we ask libraries to do is preserve the printed past, and that's what they've failed to do in this case. They built a huge, big building, but they didn't put enough shelves in it. The estimate that I hear over and over again is that at least 200,000 books were removed from this library since the time of the earthquake.
Library officials say Baker's numbers are high and that librarians discard only duplicate copies and books not appropriate to the public library's collection. They cite the crowds of people admiring and using the library as evidence that the building is successful. Supporters, including State Librarian Kevin Starr, remain enthusiastic.
San Francisco has gone in 10 years from a neglected system to the cutting-edge system in this country.
In the months to come, librarians will have to work to solve the problems of space and staffing created by the popularity of the stunning architecture and the heavy usage of high-tech innovations.